What is the most disturbing thing you've witnessed at your job? I was a bored cashier who wasn't allowed to leave her counter. If a customer rejected their receipt, I was supposed to rip it up and throw it away, but I tended to defy regulations by tearing off the bits with personal information, folding the rest into origami, and giving it to the next child who came though my line. Because getting parents to give you compliments is pretty much a survival tactic when working retail. One night, I'm working a closing shift and it's snowing out. A mother comes up to my register with two young girls, one of whom is pale and leaning listlessly against the counter. The other is full of energy and being a brat as only a brat can. The mother is buying her a toy, and as soon as I've scanned it, she starts to rip the packaging open. The toy is broken by rough treatment before the mother even receives her receipt. The woman asks if we can replace the toy for her for free, right then and there. I tell her that I'll have to get a manager to find out, and the daughter screams for her toy. The mother comforts her bratty child that tomorrow they'll take the broken toy to our competitor and say that it came out of the package that way, but that for now they'll just go and pick out something else. She asks me if I can watch her second child, who isn't looking well and hasn't said a word. I tell her that that's not our policy, and she walks away oblivious, assuring me that she won't be a minute. There's no one else in my line, so I decide to just let it be, and I take a closer look at the somber child I've been left to babysit. She seems calm and resigned about her mother leaving her, and she also appears to have a cold. I take a paper swan out from under my counter and offer it to her. Her eyes light up. She turns it carefully between her hands and tells me that she's always wanted to learn how to make these. I smile and ask if she'd like me to show her. I hand her another piece of receipt paper that I'd had ready and begin to walk her through the steps. We are only halfway through when her mother and sister come back. I smile at the mother and begin to explain what we've been doing, but she's uninterested and shoves another toy at me. As I scan it through and begin ringing up the purchase, I suggest to her that she help her daughter go online and look up how to fold paper swans, but she cuts me off to say, dismissively, that her daughter doesn't need to know that. As her mother and sister prepare to leave, the girl shows her first sign of resistance and grabs my counter, beginning to voice a protest, but the mother seizes her arm and pulls the girl away so hard that she stumbles, not looking at her or giving her a moment to regain her balance. The bratty child talks excitedly all the way to the door, and the sick girl looks back at me sadly, a half-completed swan clutched in her hand. I spent the rest of the night fantasizing about vaulting over the counter and pulling the sick girl into my arms, adopting her, and teaching her to fold an origami zoo. I was a paramedic. We were called to an abortion call, which just means miscarriage. Arrived to find a 14-year-old girl who didn't know she was pregnant. We cut the cord on the what looked like about a 3.5 month long fetus. When en route to the hospital, we were waiting for her to deliver the placenta. When she finally did, it had another cord connected to it. Twins. Stillborn twins. Did I mention this was my first day on the job? And it was my first call. I work in a state senate. My first day on the Senate floor, I saw that a lot of the senators weren't physically there, and staffers pushed buttons at their desks to vote for them along caucus lines. This is a regular part of the process, but it really shocked me when I first saw it. A man have a heart attack and the customer behind him just step over him and demand service. I worked at a restaurant where we caught a mouse in a glue trap. The chefs tortured it. They cut it open, removed its organs, and lit them with a bic while it was alive. When I yelled at them to stop, they mocked me for being some feel girl. I saw a man get crushed to death. I was working at a chemical plant that was in the late stages of construction. We had a cement factory on site, and it had a large cement mixer that was approximately 20 feet in the air. The cement was poured into it, it rotated to mix the cement, and then it would tilt and pour the cement into a truck that was parked underneath it. One afternoon, the mixer stopped rotating for some reason. A group of maintenance workers climbed the scaffolding to inspect it. Once they got to it, they tied off to the scaffold using lanyards. The mixer was protected by a metal cage that covered approximately 75% of it. One of the maintenance workers grabbed a 2-foot long metal wrench and walked into the small gap between the mixer and the cage. When he got to the back of the mixer, he bent over and did something with the wrench, and the mixer lurched out of its track and pinned him against the cage, crushing his whole upper torso. As the mixer rotated, it dragged his body out of the cage and off the scaffold until his lanyard broke his fall, leaving him suspended about 10 feet of the ground. Blood kept gurgling out of his mouth and nose and onto the ground below as his body twitched. After a couple of minutes, he stopped twitching and just went limp. I was exiting a building about 25 feet from him as I heard the people start screaming. This happened over a decade ago and it still creeps me out when I think of it. I've wanted to tell this story for a long time. I work at a restaurant as a server. I was taking food to a table for 4, nothing out of the ordinary. They even all got the same thing, so it was very easy passing out the food. So upon setting the last dish down on the table, I asked the mandatory question, do you folks need anything else? They replied no, everything's great. So I walk away from the table, tray in hand. All of a sudden I hear a ruckus behind me. I turn around to see a spilled drink on the table, and the horrified face of a 9-year-old boy looking at what he'd done. This boy's mother reaches across the table and backhand slaps her kid. As he recoils from the slap, and then comes back up, hand holding his face, on the verge of tears, his mother slaps him again. You don't take the ketchup without my permission. I run back to the table, and make an effort to clean up for them, with the sobs of this kid echoing throughout the restaurant. Apparently the kid reached across the table, to get the ketchup bottle and accidentally knocked over his drink. Why his mom reacted in such a horrible fashion, I have no idea. A 46-year-old father of 3 burst into tears when he was told he was being made redundant. Something about seeing a grown man cry that is horrifying. I currently work in radiology, a support position, IRNED. The case that got to me the most was a 25-year-old kid who was in the hospital for a handful of digestive issues, abdominal pain, bloating, bad bowel movements, that sort of thing, and on the court, it turned out the majority of his intestines had been replaced with cancer. Way past any hope for treatment. This kid didn't have long. It got even worse when I read into his history a little bit. The kid had been into the hospital a year previously for similar, but milder digestive issues, particularly diarrhea. Unfortunately, at the time, his insurance wouldn't cover the cost to get a court scan, so the docs sent him home with Imodium and Pepto-Bismol and told him to drink lots of fluids. A year later, and his abdomen has more cancer in it than guts. Fuck the healthcare system, seriously. Oh, that's an easy one. I used to be an EMT and responded to a call for difficulty breathing on Christmas morning. Wow, that sure sounds like a tragic situation and definitely something heartbreaking. Show up, front doors open, knock on the screen door, and hear a faint help me come from just inside the house. Hear children crying. Sounds like mom collapsed. Partner and I enter the house along with 2 firefighters from the truck. The FD responded with us. The mom collapsed alright. Mostly because of the knife that's sticking out of her shoulder. The kids are next to her bawling their eyes out. We are radioing for police. The firefighters are calling their brother's help in case whoever stabbed the mom is still around. Cop cars come screaming up. We realized one of the kids smells like gasoline. Da fuck. While we are patching up their mom, my partner finally gets one of the kids to calm down enough that they were able to describe what happened. Dad was sleeping in. The kids woke him up to ask if they could open Christmas presents. He wakes up and backhands one of them. Mom starts crying, probably because the husband hit their kids for waking him up on Christmas morning. So he stabs her with a knife right in the shoulder. Then he walks down to the basement and grabs a gas can, starts dousing one of the kids in gasoline. He strikes a match when he hears his wife on the phone. She's only able to get out that she's having problems breathing. He storms out the front door. These kids sit and watch their mom bleed on the floor while they're covered in gasoline. On Christmas morning. Not as gory or pulse pounding as other stories. Just dreadful. Those kids were probably 3 and 4 years old or so, and every year Christmas will be that holiday where dad stabbed mom and tried to burn them, all because they had the audacity to open presents with him. I've seen shoplifters force their children to steal, then beat them when they get caught. I've seen innocent people get shot. I've seen a fully grown man hit an unsuspecting 70-year-old woman in the face with a haymaker. I've seen a thief beat up his own buddy because he got caught stealing. I've seen a guy take a sip from a Coke can with a bee inside it get stung in the mouth. A coworker died of a stroke at her desk. We found her dead, open-mouthed, sitting at her desk with a pen still in her hand. Another coworker was fired, and since she had worked here for 20 years, it shocked everyone. To do damage control, one of the managers rounded everyone up into the conference room and disclosed to all the fired person's medical and marital problems. Another former coworker had a nasty habit of stalking young women at the company. One of these women reported him, and the hours rep asked her what she had against men. Creepy dude was never punished and retired with honors. Viralegal here. I've seen some pretty gnarly evidence and autopsy photos and videos from crime scenes, but one of the things that stick with me was in my first year of working for a family law attorney. My boss had been appointed by the state to represent a young mother whose children were being taken away from her. She had some drug problems and was pretty low functioning and completely incapable of parenting, but she had 2 adorable kids. And she loved them. God help that woman, she loved those kids. She just never remembered to feed them or watch them. She would leave them alone while she went to get high. That sort of thing. But when she was sober and straight, she wanted to be a good mom and she would try until she started using again. She couldn't really understand the juvenile court process on her own, so the attorney had to explain it to her several times. For the longest time she tried to get her kids back. She went to rehab only to relapse. She got a job, seasonal, which of course ended when tourist season ended. She lost her apartment and then found a guy who said he would marry her so she could get the kids back. He was also a drug addict and convicted felon, and of course, he dumped her. She just couldn't get it together. We delayed the inevitable as long as we could. On the day she signed the papers terminating her parental rights so her kids could be adopted, she just put her head down on the table and pulled those deep, hard, flag me sob someone sobs when they have reached absolute rock bottom. I couldn't take it. I had to leave the room. Very unprofessional, and I got bawled out for it afterward, but my heart was breaking for this poor woman. I had to physically leave the room to keep from reaching out and hugging her. She only wanted her babies with her, and the state was taking them away. She kept saying it's for them, right? It's for them. And we reassured her that of course it was, and she was being such a good mom by letting them go. Those tears and those sobs, and seeing the heartbreak and loss in that mother's eyes tears me up every time I think about it. I see her around town, of course. It's a small town. I don't know if she would recognize me, but I always look down or away when I see her in a store or somewhere. Every time I do I remember, and I feel so sorry for her and her babies. I hope they are happy. I had her 18-month-old girl brought into care. Her face and body were so badly bruised we were scared to hold her. Head had a dent in it from one of the hits and she would flinch every time one of us went near her. I see lots of messed up kids, but this one always affected me. She is gorgeous now and fully healed. A guy where I work, university lab, had a seizure. He must have felt it coming on, and he managed to get himself out of the lab and into the hallway before it hit him. My boss had seen it happen, called 911, and then grabbed me from my office to help. The poor guy hit his head when he fell, so when I came onto the scene, he was twitching in a huge puddle of his own pee and covered in blood. That was not what disturbed me. It was the crowd of students that came to just stare and watch and try to take pictures with their phones. I lost my temper, chased them all away, and did my best to keep them away while the medics worked on him. No respect. None at all. Work in hospital. Had a brain injury patient, basically a vegetable, make a long recovery over 9 months to get some motor function back. He could understand us speaking to him and started letting us know what he needed and such. He ends up coding over a drug he should have never received. The doctor caps his tracheostomy to be tube they stick in through her throat, allows you to breath so they could intubate him. Code's over, but they forgot to uncap his trash. 7 minutes or more without oxygen to your brain can kill it, so Goose, who's a vegetable again for life. It was terrible. He stayed with us another year then got transferred out. I've seen tons in the air as well. Worst call was a father who ran over his 3-year-old head while backing his 4-wheeler out of the driveway. Having the father in the trauma bay just crying the whole time we tried to do something was sad. I watched a fax slowly print out. It was an appeal response letter I received back from Horizon NJ Health. They were upholding the denial of an 80-year-old man's spinal surgery. He was now liable for over $100K. He was admitted on Wednesday. Insurance wanted him out on Friday. He stayed until Monday when the staff cleared him to walk on his own. The pet store I worked at had a freezer for storing damaged merchandise, the animals that died before being sold. It was stuffed with frozen mice, reptiles, parrots and fish. It made me profoundly sad to look at their little icy bodies. I work in a care home for people with learning disabilities, so I've had shit thrown at me, seen shit smeared on the walls and floor, seen grown people lying in their own bodily fluids, soiling themselves while being bathed, self-harming, soiled nappies, soiled beds, coworkers being attacked by residents, have to handle shit, butts, saliva etc. Bathe and dress old disabled men, etc etc. Probably the worst thing was when I was out with some of the residents in town, and at McDonald's one of our residents soiled themselves. Instead of telling me and going to the toilet, they panicked, crying and screaming, taking off their shit-filled pants and flicking them around on their foot in a windmill motion, causing stray pieces of shit to fly all around the McDonald's and at innocent members of the public. Eventually I managed to get them calmed down, but I bet everyone at that McDonald's had a story to tell when they got home. You get numb to it all after a while. I actually often forget how disgusting some aspects of the job can be to people who don't experience in care services or other careers that involve this kind of work.